one out of every four people in the world have some form of disability. So chances are really, really high that your employees represent a good populace of the disabilities that your users likely have.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Brill, and today we're going to kick off our series on accessibility. And joining us today are Alaina Beaver and Tony Morales, and they're going to walk us through the world of accessibility as it comes to internal-facing and external or customer-facing. So they're really going to give us some great insights and understanding into that world. All right, here we go.
Hi, my name is Tony Morales, he, him, his, and my role at ServiceNow is focused on internal accessibility, advocacy, and awareness. And that is improving the employee experience for employees here at ServiceNow with disabilities.
Now, that's obviously very important because we want to be a leader in that at ServiceNow. And Alaina, that's really where your role comes in. Explain that side of accessibility.
Sure. Thank you, Bobby. Well, wonderful to be here. My name is Alaina Beaver, she, her, hers. And my role at ServiceNow is I am the head of customer accessibility, customer engagement. And so I take up more of the outbound, external facing role in engaging customers and evangelizing our accessibility story from the ServiceNow perspective outward.
I want to have both of you talk a little bit about how accessibility works from your individual perspectives. Tony, you internally, and Alaina, you customer facing. Tony, I want to start with you. What does that mean helping employees with accessibility seems very simplistic, but I'm guessing it's not. How does that work?
So we here at ServiceNow, part of our People Pact, uphold our diversity, equity, and inclusion moral imperative. DE&I is extremely important to ServiceNow, as our listeners know. And part of diversity, equity, and inclusion, to fully realize that, you also need to take into account accessibility. And internal accessibility, awareness, and advocacy, improving the employee experience for persons with disabilities, really just goes hand in hand with our DE&I commitments at ServiceNow. I truly believe that you can't have one without the other. Each one help reinforces the other one. And what that means is giving employees the tools and the technologies that they need to be successful, regardless of any disabilities, just as you would want to ensure that an employee feels included, that there is equity and diversity in the workforce. So too, would you want to ensure that those employees are set up for success and that they can be given the tools and the technologies that they need in order to be successful.
And that's like I'm going to reiterate that because we've talked about this at length, and it seems like this is a relatively new way of thinking, not just for ServiceNow, but for a lot of companies. This idea of making sure that everybody has accessibility, because the accessibility need is so large or so expansive. How would the best way to describe that, Tony?
That is a really good question. It is and it is not simultaneously, kind of a new way of tying these two things together. What I learned through the course of my internal advocacy and awareness at ServiceNow is that I want to say in 2021, President Biden signed an executive order that essentially makes DE&I across all federal groups also include accessibility. So it is DEI and A. And that is not the only place where I have seen this happen. There are other companies that have also put accessibility at the same table as diversity, equity, and inclusion. And going back to what I said a little earlier, how I truly believe that you can't have DE and I without also including accessibility, because accessibility and inclusion are really two sides of the same coin. It's hard to live up to your DE and I values if you don't also ensure that an employee's journey throughout your company is successful if that employee has a disability.
Well, Alaina, that's definitely the very simple segue to you. You're working with our customers and you're working with the people that are using our products. Um, how important is accessibility, and how do you promote it and raise awareness for accessibility with our customers?
Oh, excellent question. And so I'm going to build on a lot of what Tony was saying. Accessibility is table stakes for our customers, especially in the public sector, but increasingly across the private sector as well. The writing is on the wall that inclusive, accessible companies are successful companies. And so when you think about other major players in the technology business, like Apple, for example, they have really leaned into their accessibility presence, and they have just these beautiful advertisements that feature people with disabilities seamlessly using their products. And they've kind of created a great model for what completely realized GEI and A products look like. And it's helping to set the standard. So now our customers are looking around at their software solutions and how they're designing their own organizations. And they're thinking about this. They're really taking on this idea of DEI and A and looking for partners in this effort. They're looking for vendors. Don't always love positioning ServiceNow as a vendor, but that's honestly how some of our customers think of us. They're looking for everyone to help them meet and exceed that accessibility goal so that they too can embrace this opportunity to serve the whole person when it comes to their employees and their customers, right? So, taking the citizen facing experience into account, for example. If our customer is a state and local government organization and they're setting up a website and they're using ServiceNow technology, they want to ensure that any citizen who utilizes that portal is going to have a fully accessible end-to-end experience where they can get in and make adjustments if they need to so that the UI changes and is responsive to their individual needs. Or if they're an assistive technology user, that they can toggle on their AT and it will work seamlessly as they expect it to. Accessibility is really the floor when it comes to what we're designing for. It's not the ceiling. We are trying to reach above and beyond and create beautiful, usable, highly inclusive user experiences. And so when we sell that and we ensure that our out of the box software is accessible, our customers can have that as a piece of reassurance that they are now part of this larger story, this larger promise of equity and inclusion that we get to deliver around the world and make things better for all people.
I mean, that sounds like the a great domino effect where we're pushing off and helping things to really connect all the way through, and helping the customer to the next customer to the end user. And I like how you use the word citizen, and that's really what this is all about, that every person is included in this. Tony, I want to ask you, can you give me some specific examples internally about some internal accessibility initiatives that have really benefited the people here at ServiceNow? And then, of course, Alaina, I want you to talk about how we have done that now for our customers, because I want to see which came first, which chicken or egg came first.
Well, I am going to cheat a little bit when talking about, well, I'll give a couple of examples of internal accessibility initiatives, but I'm really going to start with an external one. When the accessibility product team formed in 2022, one of the first things that we tackled were our portals, in particular, the onboarding workflow. In terms of creating a great employee experience here at ServiceNow, there are certain applications and certain tools that every employee uses along their journey when they are onboarded and when they are hired into this company. And there are other tools that we use every single day. So we're looking at those tools to ensure that they are accessible to all users, regardless of disability. Some of that we do get for free because it is built on top of our own products. At ServiceNow, we like to use the phrase drinking our own champagne. So we get some benefits from the work that we've already done on the accessibility product team in terms of making our external products and platform accessible. And I'm sure Alaina will talk more about that in a moment. But there's still much work to be done internally. As well, on the physical workplace side, workplace services ensures that all new facilities that come online meet the accessibility requirements of the country in which those facilities reside. And just looking around the new buildings here in Santa Clara at ServiceNow that just opened a little over a year ago as we're recording this, I did a walkthrough with some of the workplace services folks looking for areas where we might be falling a bit short, some areas where we have gotten the experience just right for persons with disabilities, and something even as simple as putting additional Braille labeling on elevator buttons to go up versus to go down was something that was initially overlooked. Workplace services noted that omission and within 6 months had that fixed, at least here in Santa Clara. So we're very proactive at ServiceNow, both on the software side as well as on the physical side of ensuring that the employee experience is as accessible as it can possibly be. And like all things, it is very much a work in progress. We have accomplished a great deal. We do have a long way to go, but we are continuing along this journey and have some remarkable things to be proud of so far.
And what you're saying is really so important because anybody who's just scratched the surface of accessibility realizes there are a lot of accessibility needs outside of, the simple thinking of handrails and braille lettering that go into neurodiversity and all the things that we've talked about before. Alaina, talk to us about that, where we're dealing with customers who have such a broad um, group of people working for them that accessibility really is paramount.
I'm going to give an example that's not necessarily a specific customer example, but I think it really speaks to what Tony is saying about physical accessibility and opportunities to go above and beyond. And so, whenever we're interacting with customers, we always like to reassure them that our commitment is absolutely to withhold the legal standard of their country. And for the most part, all of those ladder up to the international set of guidelines, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, also pronounced WCAG, 2.1 AA, very soon to become 2.2 internationally as these pieces of legislation adapt and advance to embrace the new standards. But, there are simple things that can be done to just help design for a diversity of use cases, even if you're technically meeting the standards. So, in a physical environment, that might look like having a building where you have a button off to the side that is at a certain height that is regulated on, pushing the button and then it will automatically open, right? This is absolutely necessary for individuals who use wheelchairs, for example, but it can benefit a lot of different people, right? Pushing a heavy cart, pushing a baby stroller, just have a bunch of stuff in your hands and you want to, maybe during COVID, nobody wanted to touch icky door handles, right? Because using their elbow to hit the button. But I just saw an example recently of a public space that had proactively included a duplicate set of buttons that were actually lower and they were at floor level. And it was the perfect height for a person who uses an automated wheelchair to bump the button with their wheelchair at the bottom and to be able to use the automated doors that way. And so as an electrical change, it's, just another button further down. But for some users of wheelchairs who aren't actually able to easily hit the button that's at that level, hitting it with their chair was a game changer. And so I saw this on, a YouTube example of a user who was like, this was amazing proactive accessibility. Thank you so much. I believe it was like a museum or something that had done this. And so it's things like that, outside of the box thinking, ways that we can proactively be accessible that are such wins. And so I love hearing from our customers about the ways in which they are actually using our products because they come up with all kinds of use cases that we could never anticipate. And so we get so many real life stories from them about things that they love about our products that are working well as things that are really annoying to them personally. We have a member of our PAC. So we have an accessibility product advisory council. And recently, a PAC member came to us with something that technically, standards wise, it was a usability issue. Things were labeled, but they wish that some of the accessible labels for things on the page could be shorter because they tab through so many of the same type of item that it was a lot of clutter to listen to on his screen reader. And it was just sort of cognitively exhausting, right? It's an increased cognitive load to have to listen to a lot of things in order to get things done. And so this individual was like, would there be a way for us to customize how we're labeling things? Because I just want to have things shortened up on the UI. I know where everything is. We can train to this for other folks who are screen reader users. And we just want that option. And so, it's so great to get that kind of feedback because even though we're meeting the standard and we're doing WCAG. It's in place. Like this is not a thing that's broken on an engineering perspective, but it is a thing where we could improve the experience proactively because there is a real logical case for why we would go above and beyond and do that. And so now that's something that our team is looking into to see how we can create more flexibility within the UI so that our customers have more flexibility in creating an experience that is truly usable and useful for them.
That term you used, I think all of us are going to now use in my next. I'm going to use in my next email for sure. Cognitively exhausting. Tony, talk about some of those challenges that come up for employees that really kind of come up regardless of their abilities or not.
Challenges both on the software and the physical side is, believe it or not, as simple as changing something without proactively considering the accessibility implication. An example on the software side might be, we're going to change the tech stack of this web page, and oh my gosh, the thing that we're replacing is very accessible. The thing that we're replacing it with is not accessible. And it's a third-party component. And I had no idea as an engineer when I made this decision to swap thing A for thing B, that thing B was not accessible. And now all of a sudden alienates a significant portion of your user base. This happens all the time externally on the software side. This also very much affects internal things because at ServiceNow, one of our sayings, of course, is we drink our own champagne, but we are also our own patient zero. We constantly live on the bleeding edge of our platform and our products. So when changes happen, they are far more likely to affect internal users first and far more likely to affect greater those internal users who might rely on assistive technology in order to use that particular application or tool. So one of the challenges, of course, is as tech evolves, accessibility needs to catch up, whether that's your internal components or whether that's some third-party component that you're borrowing out of a library, ensuring that you catch all of that stuff early. We talk a lot about shifting left on the accessibility products team for our own products, ensuring that designs are accessible as early as possible in our product development life cycle so that we can avoid this very thing. But it is still something that can happen on the software side if you swap in some third-party piece for another, and then you find out all of a sudden that, gosh, that thing we're using now is not accessible. On the physical side, a similar thing can happen just with any sort of change. If you change out signage or if you change out room numbers, is an interesting example that actually happened during the COVID pandemic. This really happened here at ServiceNow. Before the COVID pandemic, all of our room signage had Braille labels as part of each sign. And those labels had the names of the conference rooms. And before COVID, all of the Braille signage for those rooms, you could read the name of the room. So if somebody says, "Meet me in Columbia," you can do that. If you go from room to room to room, you can eventually find the correct one. Well, sometime during the COVID shutdown, they changed out all of the signage, and the print signage still had the room numbers on it. The Braille signage did not. It had numerical numbers for each room, but it didn't have the name. And I guarantee you, because I investigated this with workplace services, they never gave this a thought that, oh my gosh, we're changing things in such a way that is actually going to make it harder for somebody who depends on these labels. There was certainly no malice behind this change. It's just a perfect example illustrated here of how, an inconsequential change to some might adversely affect persons with disabilities who depend on alternative presentations.
As you say it, it took even me a second to go, well, why would I've never used Braille, but then when you start to realize and look at numbers that there is a large percentage of people that with all of this technology advancement who have accessibility issues are your coworkers. Alaina, how can businesses, based off of some of the stuff Tony has said, prioritize their customer accessibility? What advice would you give?
Well, I think first of all, you need to just rip the Band-Aid off and make sure that you're putting it in all of your definitions of done. It needs to just become part of company policy. I mean, there's got to be some accountability somewhere. So, I want to lead with the warm, fuzzy cultural piece, but honestly, that comes later. That comes with the change management of selling the fact that you've made a new policy in which this is now part of every review at every stage of how things get done in the organization, from the facilities management piece of, we're putting new signs, we're doing new upgrades in a building. And, it's quite literally, in that sense, a checklist. We need to make sure that things are available and, that our vendor who's printing the signs knows to include the Braille on it as well, or we're not buying it, or it's not done correctly and we're going to return it, right? There needs to be some sense of consequence to ensure that some of this stuff gets done. That said, if an organization is looking to engage with their customers more on accessibility, I would say go for it. Get ready for the most amazing insights you have ever had with regards to how your products can work for everyone. I guarantee your customers are using your tools in ways that you've never even anticipated across a variety of use cases. And the more that you talk to your customers, the more that these amazing stories start coming forth, where you start to hear ways in which people are using, both the hardware and the software in ways that are going to make it work for anybody, regardless of their particular use case or their particular need. In the past, Bobby, we've talked about how accessibility isn't just disability. It's a big part of it, but that's not the only thing that accessibility is. It's also temporary needs or situational needs. It's about proactively designing the most flexible thing possible so that it can be used in a variety of ways. And so when you talk to customers, they're your users, right? They're your biggest stakeholder in a lot of ways because they need to feel that you care about it. Otherwise, they're not going to stay. They're not going to be a return customer. Their faith will be lost and they will go elsewhere, right? People have choice. That's the beautiful part. I don't know if there's very much that's beautiful about capitalism, but that's sort of that, that's a lot of the driver in this as a company is that we have a real vested interest to ensure that things are accessible so that our customers will continue to come to us and that we will be seen as we should be seen as a leader in the space. Um, when it comes to having more customer engagement channels, create a product advisory council for accessibility. Think about how you're embedding accessibility in the product and what opportunities do you have to speak with your customers. When are you getting your design and research team together, all of your UX professionals, and allowing them to interface with customers? When do engineers get to interface with customers? Have established processes for how you maintain a strong customer relationship end to end, both in sort of the front door initial experience, which is a lot of what I provide is, that welcoming face, evangelizing our story, creating personal connection, welcoming them in, giving them options for how they can participate with us, but then also making sure they get to the people in the organization that they want to speak to in order to solve their problem or have the impact that they're looking to have. So if they need a handoff to engineering, make sure that that handoff happens and that they're prepared to say, hey, customer, we value you. And let me set up a proactive set of meetings where I'm going to track your issue in a spreadsheet. We're going to create a resolution timeline and we're going to give you updates, whether you want them or not. Here they come. we're gonna we're gonna hold your hand and walk you through the whole thing. The more that we do this and create these long-term relationships with customers, they just love it. They're just wild about it. People just ultimately, at the end of the day, people just want to feel heard. They want to feel like someone cares about their issue. And if it's an accessibility issue where they're blocked, then they really need to know that you hear them and that you care. And that's our number one priority is relaying that message and then backing it up with our actions. And that's, I think, something our team is exceptionally good at.
There's one piece I'd like to add on to what Alaina just said, and that is tap your internal resources, aka your employees. ServiceNow has 9 employee belonging groups. Other companies refer to these sometimes as employee resource groups or ERGs. If you don't have an ERG or an employee belonging group for persons with disabilities, create one. Because as we've covered before on this podcast, there is, depending on whose stats you go to, according to the WHO, 1 out of every 4 people in the world have some form of disability. So chances are really, really high that your employees represent a good populace of the disabilities that your users likely have. So if you don't have a disability-related ERG, create one and then utilize that group, because those employees, those persons with disabilities will absolutely be there to tell you what's working and what's not working.
So there you have it, a better understanding of the world of accessibility as it pertains to your employees as well as your customers. So if you're interested in learning more, please hit subscribe on whatever device you're listening to so you never miss an episode. And if you're interested in learning more about the ServiceNow platform, go to www.servicenow.com/docs for more information. I'm your host, Bobby Brill. Thanks for listening.